recording. Okay, great. Thank you all for showing up this afternoon or morning, depending on where you are. It's morning here in Oregon, and it's afternoon for most of you, probably on this call, or some of you here on the West Coast. I'm Chris Branham. I am with OSU Extension Communications at Oregon State University. I have served almost for a year as the chair of the Media Relations and Writing Learning Community. And so my time will be up at the ACE conference. And I just wanted to introduce myself really quick. I wanted to mention before introducing Chris, as you all probably have guessed, this is being recorded. And I will put the link in the chat to the page on the ACE website where recordings of webinars go. So if you all want to bookmark that, or you have trouble finding on the ACE website, I'll put that in after I introduce Chris and she starts. Basically, the way this is going to go is I'm going to moderate the chat, and she would like to take questions as she's going. So if you have a question about something she just said or something popped in your mind, go ahead and pop that in the chat. And if it's something that she's going to address later on in her presentation, then she'll go ahead and say, hey, I'm going to talk about that a little bit later. So Chris Vivian, thank you for volunteering your time to do this presentation for us. Media training was something that people requested. I'm sorry?
You can go straight across.
Okay, so everybody, so let's mute everybody so we don't have people talking. So Chris Vivian, she leads the University of Florida Institute of Food and Agricultural Sciences Communication Services, a team of about 40 professionals with specialties in public relations, social media, graphic design, photography, and video production. The department, award-winning department, I should mention, also runs the Ask IFAS Extension publication system and the Extension bookstore. UF IFAS comprises UF's College of Agricultural and Life Sciences, Florida's Cooperative Extension Service, and extensive research and education efforts. Chris, thank you for coming, and I'm going to mute myself and take it away.
Thank you, Chris. I appreciate that. And welcome, everybody. And thanks for spending a little bit of time with us today. We're going to be talking about effective media training. And this presentation is one we gave at the ACE conference last year, and we had great questions afterwards and during the presentation. So we're bringing it back to share now. My partner in crime for that particular presentation was Sam Murray. She's on my team, on the media relations team, but she is currently where Chris is at OSU for a unit review. So I'm going to fly solo today. So please put your questions in the chat or shout them out. I'm not, I'm okay with being interrupted, whatnot, if something comes to mind. And we're also happy to follow up afterwards if you have some deeper things you want to talk about with regards to this. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. We tested this earlier, so I think it's going to work. All right, here we go. Can you see my screen? Heads nodding, anybody? Does it work? Did it work? Yes, okay. All right, so for effective media training, I know, we all think about, I just wish my people were ready to go and media was, calling, and how do we get that to happen and get people to be comfortable when it's their turn to share their story. And we want them to feel comfortable and we want them to be responsive. So how do we get them trained? What is it we need to do? And so we are going to step through our agenda. Why do we do it? Why do media training? And what are your goals? So when you're thinking about, I'm going to set up a media training, what's that going to look like? So we're going to have goals for your media training, what you should include so that you can meet those goals, and then tips for getting them there. Because as you may have experienced, if you've tried to get people to trainings, a lot of folks don't think A, it's for them, or B, that they need it. But everybody can get a little bit better so that they're prepared should the media come calling. So first section, why do media training? So hold on here, I can't read, there we go. So let's just pick a scenario. Has this happened to you or anybody in your organization? One of your experts is interviewed by the news media, and it didn't go great. A bad interview, as we know, can be really bad for your institution's reputation. Your person wasn't prepared. Maybe they got led down a path they shouldn't have been talking about, and it makes your institution not be as positively reflected as you would want. So that's the first reason. We want people to be prepared. So your media training, you want them, your goal is to teach experts how to work with reporters, communicate their knowledge and impact so the general public can understand it. Now, not everybody has that ability to take their complex subject matter and make it easy for the general public to understand. So sometimes they need help. So the pro tip there, the tip for them is that if the reporter doesn't understand it, the story won't be accurate. And that's what we're trying to avoid. So that is the first reason why we want to do media training for people. The second is to promote and protect your brand, because as we all know, once you get that opportunity to be interviewed by the media, to have your experts, in the media, you want the quality media coverage. So you want to make sure that your expert is prepared. Obviously, we'll prepare the reporter as best we can, but we can't help them once they get on the interview time. And we want them to shine. We want them to be comfortable, and we want the brand perception to be great. We say, gee, that guy from the University of Florida was great. That's interesting work. I learned a lot. So that's what we want people to come away with. And training will help with that. So what's the challenge? So the challenge is that our experts, mostly researchers, are used to communicating with their peers, the stakeholders, people who already speak their language, the language of science, and they're used to, poster sessions and conference sessions and things where they really delve into the science. And there are a lot of assumptions that come with that language. As we know, it's a lot of jargon sometimes, it's a lot of scientific terminology, and they're very comfortable conversing that way, but it doesn't work in a media interview. In addition to that, a lot of times we find that our researchers or our experts don't know how the media works. They don't know what to expect during an interview if they haven't done one before, or if they haven't done one in a long time. And in the recent years, doing one virtually, that's a little bit different, so they have to be aware and they have to be prepared. So these are some challenges that we want to address. Now, I used to work with someone in a different world. I worked with somebody who every time the media called, they said, let's get your talking points together. Let's, do this so that you're ready. And he would tell me, this is not my first rodeo. Okay. I don't know. He would just say, I'm ready. It's not my first rodeo. And he would start off on the right topic, but he would try to include in the interview absolutely everything that our company does. And that was not what the interview was about. So it took a while, but eventually he learned to work with the talking point system. And I would stay there in the interview and just, do this. Just stop talking. It's too much. And that got to be a good thing. But that was sort of a long-term one-on-one training situation. And after his, 100th rodeo, he still wanted talking points. So that was good. So he learned from that. And I think media training shows its value when people get in front of a microphone. So you have to sit down and say, okay, what are my media training goals? You want to set up some media training and say, what are the goals? Now, your goals might be a little bit different, but when we do it here in Florida, these are the things we sort of set up and said, these are the things that are important. These are the things that tend to be an issue for us. First, we want to start off by communicating the goals of media relations. We're resources, and I'm preaching to the choir here. We're a resource for promoting research impacts and programs. We help them translate that for the general public. But sometimes they either don't think they need that, or they just don't understand why they would need somebody sort of in the middle of that. We are their resource for vetting media requests. If the phone call comes directly to the expert, we encourage them to take down some information and give us a call so that we can make sure that that's a proper thing to be responding to. We'll do that. We want them to know that. So we include that in our media training. We say, we will handle that for you. Here's a process. It couldn't be easier. And that we're there to help them handling a crisis. And crisis can be a small crisis where maybe there's some misinformation in a story or something's not being understood correctly, or a big crisis where we really have to get a hold of a message ahead of time. And we want them to know that they're there. They don't have to take it on themselves. We're here to help them do that. So that's one goal. Another goal is to clear up misconceptions. So we are not the media, and that is a misperception that we run into, pretty regularly. We're not the media. We don't control the media. We can't go back to the media and say, oh, here, I want you to write it this way. I want you to write it that way. They don't understand the different roles that we play here and who's doing what. And we don't believe that any publicity is good publicity. We want to protect our reputation, and we want to promote the good things that we're doing. So we want to be selective in how things are presented once we're bringing material to the media. Another goal is to increase their understanding of the news industry. What is the news? Who are the news people? Who are the reporters? How does the industry work? They don't understand how the industry works oftentimes, and why should they, right? And so we want to make sure that they understand how the news gets to be the news. Why is it there? Why is that story there and some other story isn't there? We do it very briefly, but we want them to understand the process just a little bit.
This meeting is being recorded.
So that we understand, so they understand why we're asking them to do certain things, what to expect during an interview, things to do and things not to do during your interview, and how working with the media is a form of outreach. And that's one of the things that people who are reticent to take media interviews, we try to position this as part of outreach, which they all have to do. So if they are working on a grant and they have a paper to promote, it's interesting, we think the general public would be interested in it, we can position this opportunity for them as part of their outreach for their grant and for their research work. And oftentimes that sort of will go, oh yeah, I hadn't thought about it that way, because they may be thinking of outreach as presenting a paper at a scientific conference maybe, or doing a workshop or a field day or something like that, and not so much media in the terms of outreach. So we try to position it that way. And another goal is to increase our capacity to be working with them. So we want them to come to us. When they get requests, we want them to answer the phone when we get a request and we say, oh, I have the perfect person. They study this. This is their expertise. So we want to be able to have more people at the ready when the media calls. It happens all the time. And, we have to chase people down sometimes. And I'm sure you've all had that situation, but we want them to be comfortable. We don't want them to say, oh, the media relations team is calling. I better hide. I better not answer that call because I don't want to do that, because they're uncomfortable. So the more comfortable they are, the more capacity we have to answer media requests. We also want them to understand what's newsworthy and why. There's a lot of great work being done out there, but some of it's not quite newsworthy. It's not quite media ready. Maybe it has a very niche audience. And so we try to help them find those audiences, but we also want to help them learn to identify when a story does have that opportunity. Is it timely? Is it unique? Is it something that's, going to make a big impact in an area that people can understand? And if they learn to recognize the newsworthiness of their own stories, they'll start working with us a little earlier. So that increases the news story and the capacity to identify news if we can sort of recruit them to help us identify that. And we also want them to be comfortable following interview best practices. So we've identified our goals and we know, okay, we know what they want, what we want to get out of that, to make sure that we're partners when it comes to the media. So we're building our media training. Now, what do we include in the training? So first of all, we want to make sure that the content is tailored. As communicators, we always think, who's our audience? You know, who is our audience, and what do they need to know here? Well, the same is true when you are building training for media training. So is it extension faculty? Is it researchers? So when we're trying to get them interested in this, or we want to reach them, we say, well, if it's researchers, we might be talking more about how they can simplify their scientific terms, how they can translate that into more consumer friendly language, if you will. Extension faculty are probably more comfortable with that, but they might have another aspect that we need to make them familiar with and comfortable with. Are your people beginners? Are they new researchers? Are they new to the university? This is actually a good time to have a media training, because we can invite new faculty, you know, and maybe new faculty in a certain specialty. So you can identify those opportunities and tailor that message. Are they intermediate? Are they advanced? Remember, it's not my first rodeo. It doesn't mean every interview you're ready for. So we want to make sure that we identify who's in the room, because that it will help us address it at the comfort level that we need to do. Are we talking about crisis communications? We really want our faculty to know that we are there for them in a crisis. We are there for them to help identify the way to address the crisis, how to do it, when to do it, who should speak, who should not, and that we have crisis preparation. We have a plan for crisis, and we will address it and be partners with them to get them through that. So we want to address crisis whenever we're doing our media training. So be sure you're putting in the basics of crisis communications, and also to reiterate to them that they do not, have to go it alone. So this is when we were talking about understanding the news. So what do we tell them about that? So we want to demystify the news to them, because what the news media is and what it isn't. And these days, that is getting harder and harder for people to discern. I heard a very good, the Poynter Institute did a very good piece the other day on misinformation in social media and echo chambers that are in social media. And you always hear that, oh, you have to, apply some critical thinking to what you're seeing. And the Poynter Institute has suggested maybe you should use some critical ignoring as well. And I liked that term, critical ignoring. But when it comes to the news media, a lot of times what you'll find is people say all of the media is bad, and all of the media is out to get me. And so we try to say that's actually not true. Most of the time what you have is a reporter on an assignment or a story with a deadline. They're doing their job and they have questions, and we want the answers to those questions to be accurate. Now you can let them be out there finding inaccurate answers to a question that you could have answered and provided good information for, but we try to absolutely define the media and what their job is and how they do their job. And so that tends to take a little bit of the fear factor, the gotcha factor out of the media training, so that they say, okay, if I think about this person in those terms, then maybe I can be a little less nervous about it and provide better information and be more comfortable taking an interview. So we try to explain what makes a good news story, because as we know, everybody's outcomes for their research paper, they're very proud of it. It's good work. But is it a story that's going to go? Is it a story that's going to be something that the media will pick up? And helping them to identify that is good. Is it a unique story? Is it something that solves a problem for people? Is it timely? Is there something else going on in the news? So we want to define those things for them so that they can see the elements of a good story. We can share with them other stories that have been very successful, and so that they can see, oh, see why it's this way and see why it's that way. And sometimes we'll say, and this is why. Maybe we'll say, you know what, your story is good, but the timing might not be right. And if they're patient with us, we can get it placed at the right time or the right location if it's niche information. So we try to educate them about that. We do try to touch on the reporting process and journalistic ethics. Back, in our first bullet point about what the media and news media is and what it isn't, a lot of times that, there's a bad media environment right now where journalists are oftentimes not thought of as having ethics, but they do. And we all know that. And we need to help raise the profile of true journalism in the minds of our researchers and experts as well, and why we want to work with them. We try to explain about deadlines because when a reporter is on the deadline, as you well know, deadline's tomorrow at 4 o'clock, and the researcher says, I'm available next Tuesday at 11. That's not helpful. And that means we're not going to get the interview. We all know that, but we have to help nudge along how important that is, because what it means is a missed opportunity. It's not coming back. They're not going to wait till Tuesday at 11 o'clock. Just because you're there. So we try to help them be more flexible and ready to answer those questions, maybe a little quicker than we thought. And then it's probably not going to take very long, hopefully, for them to take care of these questions. And then why they're coming to the researchers. If you position the researchers and just say you have the right answers, we as universities where we're trying to share science and accuracy, we have the responsibility to answer those questions, because we can't sit there, not answer the questions and complain about misinformation at the same time if we're not trying to solve those problems. So we want to position the expert. They're coming to you because you have these answers. So let's make sure that the people can get accurate information as best we can. And this is a great way to do it. So you do want to demystify the news. It seems like a sideways thing, but it really does help with your learners in the room so that they understand this career path that they probably aren't very familiar with. The interview. So this is the thing everybody's terrified of, is the interview, as you know. We try to encourage them to understand that the interview probably isn't going to take very long. And that's another, that's back to, go ahead and take the interview. It's not going to take all day. And it's faster than they're going to think. And it's not a quiz. It's not a gotcha test. They have legitimate questions about your work or legitimate questions about this area of science that you're an expert in, and you can inform the situation. They're gathering facts to build their story, and that we want to be the ones providing facts. So this is what you will expect. And we really talk about this one. You will be recorded. Don't ever think you're off the record. What we say is just once you're done with your interview, don't say another word until you're, down the street and around the corner, because you will be recorded. There will be notes, audio, photos, video, and those kinds of things. We try to make sure that they understand that they can't just turn around and say, oh, this part's off the record, but here's what's really happening, because that's going to make it into the interview if it's good enough, and we don't want that. So we want to make sure that they understand completely that they are on the record all the time. So preparing for the interview. So we get to the point where, they say, okay, we're here, we're going to do this interview. How do we get ready for it? Because even though you're an expert, usually we try to vet our reporters. We vet the inquiry so that we are sort of honing down. What is the real point of your story? What are you trying to get at? What are you trying to learn? What do you already know? What is the context of how you got this story, so that we can position the expert into understanding what they want to convey as within context of what the reporter is asking. If we can know that they've talked to other people, or that what the bigger story is that they're trying to tell, it helps those talking points to be more pointed or targeted exactly what we want to say, because we want them to say what we want them to say for the story. We don't need them going all over the field, right? So we develop 3 to 5 talking points and practice the talking points. Practice them a few times, say them in your own words, make sure that you're comfortable with those questions. If we can get questions ahead of time, or at least question areas ahead of time, that's helpful as well. And then especially in a situation for when something might be controversial, or it could be a topic that's challenging, or a topic where there is a lot of noise around it, we try to make sure that they understand how to pivot back in an interview. So when questions go off course and they are getting into an area where they shouldn't be answering those questions, or they don't want to answer those questions, we try to give them those tips, those phrases where we can say, you get the question, it's not a question you want to answer. You can say, well, that's really not my area. What I'm here to talk about is this. And go back to their talking points, go back to their main message that they want to convey. The reporter doesn't choose to use that, that's fine, but you don't want to be on the record talking about things that are outside your lane or that swing into speculation or opinions. That's where you can get caught, and you can get caught by your own words. So we try to illustrate that and teach them how to get back to their message if they feel the interview is going in the wrong direction. And then we want to think about visuals, especially on a television interview. Where are they standing? What are they wearing? Do they have their branded shirt on, or something where they're in front of a branded item, or in an area where you can tell where they are? Or are they in a field or a laboratory where they work? What is in there? What can you see? So we want to make sure that the background is not telling a different story than what they're saying. So we want this to be very consistent. So we will help them with doing that, especially if the TV camera's coming out. You can say, well, let's pick out some areas where we can have you and get, if there's a choice. If there's not a choice, we know exactly what's in the background of that news story. So we don't want a messy laboratory for somebody who's talking about, something that has to do with cleanliness or the importance of, scientific work and things like that. And it just looks like they're in a closet or something. It doesn't bring the expertise to light. So we want to think about the visuals. We want to teach them to think about the visuals as well. Are there images that we're going to send? We will work with them to provide and select the right images to go, say, to a newspaper or a magazine as well. So that's all for the same reasons. We want a very consistent, high quality look, no matter where they are. We don't think about visuals for radio, though. All right. So common training questions. We get these questions whenever we have a training, that the assumption is that every reporter has a bias, has an agenda, is going to come be a gotcha person. And that's not the case. And we know that. I mean, sometimes absolutely that's happening. But sometimes it's not. And we try to vet that and get that out in the open, or not take an interview if we find that it's really not going to be a positive experience or a positive outcome for our expert. But that's a question, and we try to address that and answer their questions about that. Also, what if the story is inaccurate? This is a big issue, because when a story comes out, and we just had something this week where a story mixed up two things in the legislature, two different things in the legislature that we were involved in as a line budget item, and those two things were flipped in a story. And so what happens? So we try to educate them about what happens. What we can do, inaccuracies, we can address inaccuracies, but what we can't do is rewrite the story for them and tell them to post it somewhere. And we've been asked to do that as well. We try to educate them about the difference between the story, the reporter, and the headline. And that oftentimes the reporter does not write the headline. And we don't really have cause to go back and talk about that or ask them to change it. But they always ask if the story is inaccurate. And then the question about, do they always have to do the interview? And that's where we go back to, we are your resource to find out if you should do that interview or not. And we'll only bring those good interviews to you. But if you don't want to do an interview, you don't have to be the one to decline. We will be the bad guy, and we will go out there and, make sure that that interview is declined in a professional way, and they don't have to deal with it. They can go on with their day. So these are common questions we get. If you have other questions that you get, put them in the chat. Let's see how we can address some of those other questions that will come up.
Yeah, Chris, we did get a question in the chat, referring to your previous slide. It's from Mike. Can you give some techniques for bridging and pivoting?
Bridging and pivoting. So for when you're talking to someone and they interrupt you and then they ask you a different question, you can go back to what you were saying before. You can just jump right over that. You can say, well, I wasn't quite finished with what I was saying because you asked me about X and I'm going to talk about X. But the pivoting is the one I think that takes the most effort because people, especially people, what we found, especially people like our IFAS researchers, they want to help, so the questions are the questions that they prepared for. And then other questions come down the line that they weren't on the list. They didn't think were coming. And those are the things that say things. How do you feel about that legislation? How do you feel about when people are saying, that IFAS is, not doing the right thing with regard to this kind of research? We always tell them, if you are being asked about your feelings, about your opinion, or to speculate on the outcome of something, just pivot back. Well, I really can't talk about that. I always go back to the science and pivot back to the science and make sure that you are going back to your talking points. What we're here to talk about today is, and you don't have to answer the questions you don't want to answer. Does that help?
Yeah, we'll see if Mike posts in the chat if it helped. It helped me. And I did want to point out, Becky made a comment in the chat referring to what you were just talking about prior to the bridging and pivoting. She said she had an experienced agent tell her that she simply demanded that the story couldn't run until she reviewed it.
Yes.
She says, "Ugh, obviously we had to talk about that." So that's something it's feedback she got from faculty.
Yes, I've actually had someone say, well, I won't take an interview whenever I talk to a reporter, I let them know that I have the copyright to that story and I have to approve it before it goes out. So y'all can just giggle a little bit about that. But he thinks it's going to happen and then it doesn't happen. I guess he must be surprised, but he doesn't get a lot of interviews, but he thinks that's how it happens. And we try to dispel that notion because you're absolutely right. They are used to, if we're writing a story, of course, we always let them review the story before we put it on our blogs or news release, something like that. That's very internal. But we do talk about that during the, how does media work? We provide them with good information and hope for the best. We build good relationships with our media so that they can trust us to bring them good information and we can trust them to be fair with it. Because the other part is, if they're not going to be fair with it, we're not going to answer their inquiries anymore. So that becomes a thing that they can understand. But the truth about, it's true. They can sometimes think they're going to get to approve the story, but that doesn't happen.
And we did have another question come in the chat about something you just mentioned from Pam. How do you handle interview requests from outlets that may have promoted alternative facts in the past? This is sort of also acknowledging what you talked about before about what the media is and what the media isn't earlier.
Yes.
We want to extend research-based facts to audiences. So getting back to Pam's question, how do you handle interview requests from outlets that may have promoted alternative facts in the past, which is a nice way of saying
alternative facts? The first time I heard that phrase, I said, what? So, anyway, that's unfortunate, but we vet the inquiry and we also vet the outlet. We look at the outlet. If that's an outlet that we just know we're not going to get treated fairly, or we have a good suspicion of that, we will decline the interview. Unfortunately, there are too many of those these days, and there are too many outlets that are just there to maintain an echo chamber of some of that misinformation you might see out there. So while it's very tempting to say, I'm going to give them the facts and they're going to use it, you don't know who else they're talking to, right? So they might be using your expert as the person to debunk. You're not there to debunk you're there on the other side. You don't know that, but you're there on the other side. And if that's what they do to experts, then we don't put our experts on there. We will decline that interview. So,
Now we've got another question. This is obviously a very interesting to the audience. What is a nice way to respond when an extension staff or ARD staff, agricultural research staff, have had an interview with a media rep and did not notify the office in advance according to internal
Yes.
university protocols? And I'm sure that a lot of us have different protocols about handling that, but
Yeah.
can you address that?
Well, this happens. And this just happened a couple weeks ago. Luckily, that one turned out really well, but the person took the interview. This person has routinely taken the interview whenever the media calls, and they never once think to call us, even though I say, hey, next time, can you give us a call? Or he'll farm out the interview to someone else who he knows who is the expert and just send it directly to him. So we have a couple of folks who will do that. It's a consistent communications situation with our team, you know, and we try to position it as not just so much a protocol. That's what we would like. Just don't take the interview, call this person, will help. But I believe it's a two-pronged thing. One, it's a desire to help. They're like, oh, you're asking a question, I'm going to answer your question. And two, they don't want to, they just forget that that's the protocol, or they don't think they need it. I don't know. Maybe they don't see the value. We need continual media training, continual positioning of our media relations people. But when you're talking to them and they call you and they said, I just took this interview with, W News, and it's going to be great. And you say, okay, well, let's talk about it. What did you talk about? What do they ask you? When is it going to air? And I try to get as much information as possible so that if there's a chance that maybe it's not going to be in the best light, that we are ready to see it and respond if necessary. It can be a teachable moment when they say, that didn't look the way I thought it was going to look. Maybe then they'll call you next time. But we do remind them every single time. We say, please let us know before the interview, so we can help if needed. Some of our people are really rock stars. They're just so good all the time on their topic, and they know how to do it. And we know we can trust that they've done it, but we don't encourage them to encourage others to do that as well. So every time it comes up, we just say, can you please let us know before you call the reporter? I don't know. Do we all struggle with that? I think maybe we do. Were there any other questions? Okay.
Sorry, no other questions. You got a couple. Thank you.
All right, great, awesome. I think we all struggle with that one a little bit, but we'll just keep soldiering on, keep asking them to do it. So how do you recruit for your media training? You know your goals, you know what your overall group needs. How do you get them there? That's another challenge. How do you get them there? How do you get them to see the value? So first of all, when we're recruiting, we might send, an email invitation to whatever the target group is. We're going to have this media training. Please sign up. We avoid media or PR jargon in the recruitment. It can be nerve-wracking, off-putting. We don't want to make them, nervous, because just like saying, oh, I'm going to get you to stand up in front of all these people. I'm going to put a microphone in your face. No, we don't want to tell them that right away, because that will scare them off. So we don't want to do that. We just say, be ready for your next opportunity to talk to the news, and keep it very simple. We've had virtual trainings, but in-person media training really is best if you can do it. Smaller groups, getting a chance to maybe practice interview, role play on that. It gets the nerves up a little bit, but it also teaches them a little bit. And so we can use cameras, we can use microphones and things of that nature if we want to go that deep into the experience level. And I think that works at different levels. Sometimes at the beginning, the beginner media training, we might not quite get that far. We might just do a little role playing, and this maybe the intermediate. We'll actually get the cameras out and do it that way. But I do recommend in person if you can. Or you can do a group training with the theoretical, and then you can do practice Zoom trainings in Zoom rooms separately. Maybe take some of your communications folks and pair them up and do some simple interviews and maybe some more complex interviews as well. and target specific units. So you can do generalized media training, and that would be great. People would appreciate that. But you could go by department at times and say, okay, then we can take some of the more controversial things that tend to come up in your subject area, and we can focus on those things, why there are misperceptions, what kind of answers you can give, what people need to hear about or learn about, and how we can phrase these things so people will understand. That's the benefit of targeting specific units or topics. And so we try to try to offer it in that way if we can. We can work with unit leaders, because what we want to do is say, hey, who in your department might not have this experience? Who in your department might be working on something that might be controversial or potentially a big story coming out? Who is working on those things? Let's target them. Let's identify who they are and see if we can get them to a media training as well. That can help a lot. And give them an incentive, make sure we phrase this as a way to elevate their expertise, elevate their visibility of their work. What can we do? How can we give them credit? Is there a certificate of completion? Can we do it via an IST where they can count that on their professional development list? How can we make sure that they get credit for the time that they spent on this? Because we appreciate it. It will be very appreciated when they get the opportunity to speak to media, but it does take their time, and we need to be appreciative of that. So if we can incentivize it some way, we'll do that as well. All right, that's the end of my prepared slides.
Oh, well, good. That's great. I wasn't sure how far you were into your presentation, because we did have another question come in. It was actually directly to me.
Okay.
So I'll go ahead and ask it. It is, can you elaborate on your protocol and messaging? You had mentioned this before, but if you could expand on it, on your protocol and messaging for respectfully declining interviews.
That's a good question. I don't know that we would have a protocol so much because every inquiry is a little bit different. Sometimes we'll just say, oh, I'm sorry, we don't have an expert, or we don't have an expert that's available in the time frame that you need one. Or we might say, the person that you talk to, he's not available. We'll just not really go into too much detail. Going into too much detail tends to beg other questions. So if they're just not available, they're just not available. Sorry. So keep it short. Keep it short.
I had at least one question that came up during your presentation from myself. So I'm going to go ahead and ask it, and I'll continue to check the chat. Obviously you talk about in-person trainings, and you talk about talking to a department head or things. What's the frequency that you all do for in-person? Here at OSU, our sister unit in News and Research Communications says 3 an academic year. They set these dates. And I'm wondering how you all do it in terms of your frequency, and also how do you advertise them? How do you get the word out?
Okay, so we haven't actually done one in a little while. There was a big media training that went all around the state just prior to my arrival. We do have media relations specialists in all the areas of the state. And so this was it was an effort. There's one right there. Brad Buck is there. Lourdes is there. I don't know if we have anybody else on. Sam is out in Oregon. So we have not done that in a while. After COVID, I got here right before COVID. And so we did some boot camps that were virtual. And we included media training as one of the boot camps, and we offered that probably 3 times between 2020 and 2021. And that included not just media training, but we had, social media training, and we had, graphic design training and all these things, because people were working remotely and trying to educate virtually, and they found that they didn't necessarily have the skill set. So we did a whole series of those. So we haven't done a media training in a little while. It's probably time to do one, maybe this summer, maybe a couple of those. We're getting more requests for that. Actually got a request for it yesterday. So we'll set up some, but we don't have a standing schedule, if you will. Also, for those of you who have never been to Florida, it's huge. It really, really is big. So many of the people who are interviewed regularly by media are nowhere close to Gainesville. So they work closely with their media relations specialist when those stories come up. So we don't always have the opportunity to have a group training, but we like to do those. So we'll probably be setting something up this summer.
And a quick follow-up to that, and there is a question that just came into the chat. Do you have a certain amount that you have when you do media training? I know here it's like they try to have it be a small group. It's 8. Do you set an amount?
We would if we were in person, of course, but I think for us, if we're going to bring the cameras and we're going to bring the, bring a group of communicators to come and do one-on-one workshopping, I don't think I'd go higher than maybe 15, because it's going to take a couple of hours because you're going to do your overall media training questions and things like that. And then you're going to go into your role playing. And that's going to take a little time. And if you really are able to do this, to watch some of those interviews and critique them, that is the highest level of that, where we can say, okay, so you're moving around, you're waving your arms around, that's not good. We can get into the, okay, you practiced it and that's great. Now let's see what it looked like on the other side of the camera. So it depends on the amount of time that we're going to do and how advanced we're going to do. So I would just say probably no more than 15 for something like that.
Great. And I also want to mention the people, the folks, if you do want to just raise your hand and ask a question, that's fine as well. You don't have to put it in the chat. And there's a comment, and I hope I don't mispronounce this. Is it Lourdes?
Lourdes
And Luz. She commented, they conduct virtual media trainings for Spanish media inquiries, as well as depending on the topic, here in Florida as well, right?
Yes, we have
those are one-on-one media training.
Yes, and we do one-on-one media prep almost all the time. Whenever there's something comes up, somebody's going to be on an interview. We just have to gauge the expertise and the experience level of the person who's going to be interviewed. And then, do you want to practice? Do you want to talk about it? So that's a lot less formal, obviously. But Lourdes and Luz have been doing here in Florida. We have this past year had the very great opportunity to bring on a Spanish language media specialist, and that is Luz Bader. She's here and she works with Lourdes. There's Luz. And she works with Lourdes, and she is focused on reaching out to Spanish language media with our materials. And so there's a lot that goes into that, because we have to identify the specialists who can speak Spanish for these interviews. And sometimes that specialist is the person who is going to be interviewed is not actually the researcher who did the work. So that is a whole other amount of preparation you need for that person. They are comfortable with subject matter to some degree, but they have to get up to speed with what this particular work is and get ready for the interview that way. So that's a whole different kind of prep that we've been working this year.
Yeah, that's great. I would imagine Florida, California, and Texas probably have more Spanish language media than Oregon has media, period. So you all can keep busy, and they're big states, as we all know, big geographic states with lots of media markets.
Yes, I believe Florida is now up to about 22% of our population is Spanish language. So we are way behind, if you think about it, because we have just started this and this year, but it's been greatly appreciated by the media.
Okay, and Mike comes in, and actually there's, the Mike comes in with a question, and I think Mike is in California. You mentioned the importance of promoting the organizational brand. It can be tricky when faculty have multiple affiliations. We sort of know this. They have multiple logos and names and titles. And the organization itself has many programs, sub-programs, identities, sub-identities. What do you advise your experts when it comes to identifying their affiliation, which is really important for TV as well?
That's very important. And what we try to do, because, you can be part of UF-IFAS and, the Water Institute, and I'm also part of Coastal Solutions, and I'm with Sea Grant. Well, by then you've lost your audience completely. And there's, that's probably the easiest way to do it. So to say, you know, if you mention all of these affiliates, they're going to be very lost as to what you're saying. They're not going to, they're going to be over here wondering what all of those words were that you just said. So we try to keep it at the UF IFAS level. We encourage them to wear UF IFAS properly branded shirts. And I don't know about y'all, but there are some shirts out there that we don't want them to have on TV because it's not the right logo, or, you know, it's just, you know, it looks a little not right. So we encourage them to do that. We sometimes can provide something if they don't have one, to make sure that they are branded appropriately when they are on television. So we try to do that, and we get good response from that. The shirts help a lot. But when they want to talk about all of the affiliations, we try to keep it just at the IFAS level, maybe at the program level, if it will help the audience understand. That's the important thing. If it doesn't help the audience understand, then it's really not important for this interview. And we try to provide those credentials, you know, in writing to the reporters. They already have it, so it doesn't have to be a verbal thing necessarily. So we can do
that's
that.
great. We often say here, save your titles and affiliations for the news release.
There you go. There you go.
So
It's all in the news
for your
release.
peers. And also they can be confusing. We've had people mistitled in stories because they have so many and so long. And we have told our folks, just simply tell them what you want your title to be. That's a fair game to mention that. Chris mentions, not me, not Chris Vivian, Chris Kick, who I think is in Iowa. And this is a really not good comment. I feel like declining an interview would be a delicate decision. It's obvious, if it's obvious the reporter's out for trouble, I could maybe see it. But as a public institution, I think Chris is Iowa State. There is also some responsibility to whomever calls. A lot of us on this, most of us, the majority of us on this call are at public institutions, publicly funded institutions.
Yes, and he's right. You don't want to just say, oh, I'm not in the mood for that inquiry. We're not going to do that one today. So we do make the best effort to do it. So that's part of the vetting process. It's like, it's a legit inquiry. Can I get anyone for it? And so we will beat the bushes. We will go out there and say, you know, I'm looking for an entomologist that specializes in X. I've got these 3 people, and you'll start, you know, calling and trying to find someone who is available and willing to take the interview. So we work hard on that. And there are times when no one's available who would be appropriate for the interview. And we try to determine that early enough so that we're helpful to the reporter by, you know, getting back to them as soon as possible, because you don't want to wait till the last minute. They're hanging on, waiting for you to provide somebody, and then you say, sorry, we don't have anybody. So we don't want to do it that way. We do want to keep our good relationships with the media. And so if it's a legit and we want to be there, we want to be there. But, you know, there comes a point where we can't make the experts take the interview. And sometimes they're just legitimately not available.
Yeah, and you had mentioned earlier about, taking down some information about an inquiry and potentially, contacting your office or their local media specialist. One thing we do say here at Oregon State is that you never, ever, I'm talking about media training. We never, never lie to the media.
Never.
With one exception, you can tell a white lie if you get cold called with an interview, or cold emailed with an interview request, or usually called. You can basically say, hey, I'm right in the middle of something. Yeah. Can I call you back? And that's when you can buy yourself some time, 10, 15 minutes, to basically gather your thoughts, usually maybe on news release day. But you can gather your thoughts, but yeah, that's the one exception we make. You can just basically allow yourself to give some time. Pam does follow up on that question about declining interview requests. And I agree. It's also a good comment. It is awkward about declining interview requests as a public institution, but we also don't want to lend university credibility to outlets that aren't practicing legit journalism. And I agree, you don't want to be hectored or heckled into basically doing a interview in which it's probably going to be contentious, or you're going to be presented as one side in a controversial issue.
That's true. One other thing about declining an interview, if they're legitimately not available, they might be available to answer some questions over email. Not always the best solution, but sometimes that can satisfy, especially in a print outlet. But if it's somebody where you got to have somebody on the screen talking to the reporter, and they're not available for that, we definitely try to get all the legitimate requests filled.
Yeah, and that brings up a great point about teaching the faculty the difference in times for the media.
Yes.
TV, quick turnaround.
Quick
You gotta make a decision if you're gonna do the interview or not. If you basically wait an hour, they're gonna go on to the next person.
That's right.
But you do have that flexibility with print, and definitely with magazine, because they're usually on long deadlines.
Right.
Unless they're printing, or unless they're doing a story right to, but we do tell them, hey, and one of the things that I'm sure all of us have experienced is faculty just work on different timelines than we do and the media do. They think that getting back to the media quickly is like within 2 days.
Right.
Or a week. They said,
Right.
oh, I got back to them really quick. And it was like, well, when? Well, it was like the next day.
Yeah.
And you're like, oh, no, that's not quick. That's not in our world. So
One
teaching
thing that's it sometimes is a little encouraging is if we are on a TV interview, we know we've got the right person. We also know there are other universities in our state that would be happy to pick up the phone. Sometimes you can say, hey, if you don't take this one, USF down the street's going to get that interview. So get them on the phone. So
yeah.
you don't want to use that too much, but it is competitive out there. And, we can't say, gee, how come they're always interviewing Dr. So-and-so from this other university when we had the expertise. It's like, well, as your person, actually agreed to take an interview, it might be that they haven't. And, that's a thing. So it becomes competitive out there for getting the share of voice that we want to see from our university.
Yeah, well, we got 2 more minutes. Maybe we might be able to squeeze in one more question. If anybody wants to put it in the chat or raise their hand, I'd be happy to go to the noon hour here on the West Coast, or 2 o'clock. No, wait a second, 3 o'clock in the East.
That'll
Wow,
be
sorry.
3 for us. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm preparing myself for ACE for these time zone differences. Okay. Andrea Putman, go ahead and ask your question.
Hi, Chris. Nice
Hi,
to see
Andrea.
you. You talked a lot about when the media reaches out to you, but I wonder if you would tell us a little bit about your efforts to reach out to targeted media with a specific professor or project or something that you want to kind of cultivate some interest in.
Right. So whenever we have a news release, of course, we try to have our person ready to go and we send them out. And hopefully we'll be able to pitch them as an expert who's available to talk to you about that item. And sometimes when things are in the news, we'll say, who do we have that can talk about this? I mean, we have a good example of this right now. You've probably read about the sargassum blob out in the sarcasm, because we joke around, we call it sarcasm. Okay, so the sargassum blob of seaweed that's out there, and it's going to come ashore in different areas, including Florida. So when we first started seeing this in the news, we said, who do we have that can talk about that, so that we can get experts ready to go and pitch them out to the media we would like to be seen in, and the larger outlets that would covering this story and covering it well. If we can identify somebody, we will reach out to our reporter contacts and say, hey, I have somebody who can talk about this, and this is the work that they do. And hopefully we'll get expanded coverage on the topic, which will include our experts. So, we're always watching the news for those opportunities. Sometimes it's touchy stuff like red tide and things like that we need to be careful about. And also some of those topics will have a lot of players in them, like, state players like the wildlife and, Department of Agriculture or whatever. So we'll want to make sure that we clarify our role and that we're the proper ones to answer the question. And then we'll pitch them out and say, this is why you want to talk to this expert about this. We're the right person to answer your questions.
Yeah. Thanks, Chris. We could do a whole other webinar about media targeting, but
Yes.
We'll have to leave it there. It is 12:01 here on the West Coast, 3:01 in the East, and 2:01 in the Central. And I look for, before that, late breaking, Pam
Late
puts in a
breaking.
comment, crisis communications, regarding crisis communications. We appreciate hearing from land grant colleagues, when media are doing a story that may affect all of us, like animal rights. Okay, so that's a good plug. And that's also a good plug for our communication system within ACE. We're going to be going to a new sort of email gaggle system. Stay tuned for that. That will be talked about more at the ACE conference. I also wanted to mention, hopefully maybe I'll see some of you or a lot of you there at the ACE conference in Nashville. Thank you, Chris, Vivian, for doing this. We had a great attendance today. Lots of great questions. It is being recorded. You all can encourage your colleagues who weren't able to attend to watch the recording once it's posted to the ACE website. So thanks. And Heather, you can stop recording and have a good rest of your week, everybody.